Hey everyone, I'm Billy, and welcome back to the Perantau podcast. The Australia-Indonesia Youth Association, or AIYA for short, is a not-for-profit youth-led organization that aims to better connect young Indonesian and Australians to each other and to Australia-Indonesia related opportunities. With active chapters in every Australian state and territory, as well as Jakarta, West Java, Yogyakarta, South Sulawesi, and East Nusa Tenggara, AIYA is governed by an executive committee of early career professionals. On this episode, we have Angus Baranikow, president of AIYA Victoria chapter, coming on. Angus leads a team that takes advantage of Victoria's huge Indonesian population, not to mention its interest in the language and culture from the broader community by throwing all sorts of cool events year-round, building strong ties with the local Indonesian community, and being a key actor in grassroots Australian-Indonesian ties. I've been fortunate enough to have worked with Angus a few times in the past, as well as AIYA more broadly a few years back. Always been a keen supporter of AIYA for all the work they've done for the community, so everyone, please, without further ado, welcome Angus.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, Billy. AIYA is a youth-led organisation, a non-for-profit, that exists to better connect Australians and Indonesians together. And we do this by hosting a variety of events, educational, social, cultural, professional, and it's all done in the hopes of three main objectives. So firstly, to connect young Australians and Indonesians together so they can better interact more in the future, to inspire the next generation of youth ambassadors to better the relationship between Australia and Indonesia. And the final objective is to inform the public as to the importance of the Australia-Indonesia bilateral relationship and also just the importance of intercultural learning as well.
Yeah. Well, so AIYA stands for Australia-Indonesia Youth Association, right?
Yes.
And of course, your role as the AIYA Victoria president. How do you see AIYA, or at least AIYA Victoria, navigate its role in this space? Because you have, in some senses, more specific organizations that cater to Indonesian students abroad, like Indonesians in Victoria, for example. But then you also have more politically inclined organizations that talk about diplomacy and, not necessarily MUN, but towards that sort of public policy and development role. Yeah. So how do you see AIYA's role in that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because like you said, there's a lot of organizations based in this field and a lot of them have more specificity compared to the likes of AIYA. So AIYA does focus more so on the Australia-Indonesia side of things, whereas other organizations could focus on international diplomacy, international relations. Some have a more student orientation. But the way AIYA kind of navigates this, one of the main ways we actually help navigate this is actually through collaborating with a lot of these organizations. So recently we held a Indonesian election event, and that was done with the Young Diplomat Society. We'd been in talks for like a few months to be doing an event like that, and I think kind of understanding like the kind of the current climate of like youth organizations and particularly like difficulties in securing funding from various sources, it's very important that youth organizations work together to kind of achieve more ambitious projects and to pretty much make sure that we kind of build connections amongst each other as that allows people to grow and kind of gain more experience. But in addition to that, one thing that I found quite unique about AIYA is that we have a very broad portfolio when it comes to like the different projects we tackle. So some of the main teams that we have focus on like professional programs, education and social and cultural events. So one thing that I think is very appealing to many of our members about AIYA is the fact that it offers a broad variety of different programs. So it's not necessarily, you're not just opting in to join AIYA purely for like a professional event. You're opting in to kind of get a like a swan song of like all these different things. And I think some people may join an organization with an initial intention, like I want to go attend networking events, I want to meet new people. But then as we present more like diverse opportunities for different people, that's when they start to kind of experience areas that they didn't think that they knew about or they didn't expect themselves to get involved in. And I think that that's really helped build a community where people attend all these different events and we're constantly attracting like new people to join our events, either through like mutual contacts or also people just kind of seeing something pop up and be like, oh, that's cool to attend. In terms of how we like navigate all this, I think the most important thing is that we try to be accessible, not just to young Australians and young Indonesians, but also to anyone who's interested to learn more about this field. Because I know with some organizations, if they're simply focusing on like a particular topic, like that could potentially like switch a few people off. Like some people may not be particularly interested in like international relations, for example, but with AIYA, because we offer such a broad umbrella of programs, the benefit of that is they could come to a social event, for example, but then later on, they may be interested to come to an event about international relations, and that gets them interested and involved in that area. And I think that that's very, very important, not only for to kind of expand one's knowledge, but also to potentially discover like a new passion.
Yeah. Now I really want to know how effective that's been in your experience in terms of, well, because you talk a lot about AIYA's role in terms of more public policy and international relations and getting people interested from a sort of grassroots perspective and then fully fledging it into a potential career, right? So I want to know, how effective has that been for AIYA to facilitate that pathway?
Yeah, that's interesting. So we do have a consistent community that attends our events. And often what I've found is that over time, we tend to attract a lot of students to our organization. And a lot of them, from what I felt, a lot of them attend events while they're university students. And kind of the knowledge that they gain from these events can help them achieve like a career path. Or at least give them inspiration to kind of pursue a particular pathway. But in terms of kind of ensuring for this retention, the main way we try to do this is to continue to offer a steady supply of events. And again, going back to what I said before, is to kind of offer variety to make sure that they don't feel like it's stale. Because one thing I found that is that can be quite detrimental to retaining like a consistent audience is to just be doing like the same thing over and over again. But the moment you introduce like diversity and like new event ideas, that's something that either brings kind of like people back because they're like, oh, cool, this is something that we've never talked about before at an AIYA event, or it just brings in like an entirely new audience because it could potentially be something that we've never really tapped into before. And definitely kind of going into 2024, like that is my vision for AIYA Victoria. We have like one of the most diverse committees that we've ever had. It's also one of the biggest committees we've ever had. Currently, we're standing at about 23 committee members and going on to about 24. And with that, we have people of all different experiences, all different backgrounds. And what that means is we have the potential to have one of the most ambitious years when it comes to events. And during like committee interviews, for example, like so many people were suggesting ideas that, you know, I'd never personally thought of. And at least through my experience with AIYA for the last 3 years, it's certainly events that like we've never done before. So yeah, definitely with this year, we're very much kind of looking to offer like a more diverse array of events. And hopefully that that's not only good for the members who currently support us, but hopefully it also brings in newer members or perhaps older members who have been like busy with work. And also the other important thing is making these events more accessible as well. So we're also discussing the potential of making more of these events hybrid, just because we understand that a lot of our members, particularly once they get into like professional work, it's very difficult to attend like afternoon events, particularly on a weekday. So making these events more accessible by offering a hybrid option is definitely something that we intend to follow on this year.
Yeah, and I would just want to dig into that a little bit deeper. So how long have you been with AIYA Victoria?
So I've been with AIYA Victoria for 3 years now. So I started off in 2022. So I started off as an education officer. Last year I was its vice president, and now this year I'm its president.
Now, in those 3 years, what do you think the biggest obstacle's been?
Biggest obstacle? It's probably been committee numbers, honestly. anyone who's worked in a volunteer organization knows the like the potential issues that can arise. The main thing is obviously people's personal schedules. That can mean that someone or multiple people within a team are busy and are unable to help out with a particular event. You know, some events we ran last year were very tight in terms of like the human resources we had. And a lot of those were thankfully helped by the likes of PPIA, the Indonesian Students Association, with many events that we did, where they were able to offer a lot more people power to kind of help us out. But it was definitely something I learned from speaking with past committee members and current committee members, that they felt very strained in terms of resources. So yeah, I'd say the biggest issue that a lot of youth organisations and a lot of volunteer organisations face is a lack of like kind of people power to help them achieve their objectives. And the way I've tried to improve that this year is not only have more committee members, but to ensure for basically a greater platform of like allowing people to communicate essentially. So one thing I really want to stress this year is the ability of people to, you know, to comfortably say like, I'm going to be busy around this time, and that allows us to kind of plan around that. Because the last thing I want this year is for anyone to feel overwhelmed with work pressure, like many did last year. And yeah, to kind of create an environment where people know that we are ultimately a volunteer organisation, and that it's okay to say that I'm busy, I have personal things to deal with, and that's okay, and that all in those events, like of course, like that's the stuff that takes priority.
And I just want to point out that AIYA has quite a number, or at least a balance between Australian students and Indonesian students and everywhere in between, right? What do you think the most significant benefits of that are? And could you talk about if there are any setbacks with that as well?
Right, okay, so this is something that I've actually talked about a lot with my Indonesian committee members, because one thing they've noted is that with their experience with their Indonesian friend groups, there has been times where they've felt kind of more willing to kind of stay amongst themselves and to kind of mingle amongst themselves. And definitely like that can be very similar with a lot of Australian students as well. And it kind of takes, it's always like difficult to create an event which best allows people to kind of break the ice. But through our events and stuff, mainly through one of our programs called Language Exchange, where we facilitate bilingual discussion on a particular topic that applies to both Australia and Indonesia. One thing that allows for is for people to share their own experiences, not only in Indonesia but Australia, and pretty much allow them to bond through these particular things and to learn more about each other. And of course, the more that people know about, the more about Indonesians know about Australian cultures and other cultures, and the same with Australians learning more about Indonesian and other cultures as well, that makes them become like more willing to kind of break the ice with different people of different cultures. And indeed, like what I found is that once people have attended like a few events, they become much more comfortable in approaching these groups and pretty much like discussing things that, you know, initially you would learn, say, oh, don't mention this particular topic. But what you learned is like once you've kind of broken the ice, like there are conversations on like matters like politics, religion, that a lot of people are willing to have. And I think through attending these events as well, a lot of people kind of find the means through which to kind of have these conversations and to have it in like a respectful manner as well without making it awkward. So yeah, like that's like the main kind of way we've tried to kind of bridge all these different cultures together.
Now, I kind of want to talk about you a bit here because, well, and I don't mean this in a weird way, but you know, you're a fully white Australian, you have no Indonesian heritage, no Indonesian background, and yet...
Full bule.
Yeah, exactly, full bule. And yet you've dedicated quite a few years, both in your line as AIYA Vic's president, as well as in your academic studies, devoted to learning more about Indonesia. You know, its politics, its history, its culture. So I think that begs the biggest question, why?
That is a question that many people ask me. And, you know, I love it when Indonesians ask me because it comes from a place of like curiosity, like why are you so interested in our culture and learning more? And it's kind of I've always found it like a very endearing question as well. Like it's like, oh wow, like so many people like don't care about Indonesia. So many Australians don't care about Indonesia, and like, what makes you so interested? When it comes to Australians asking me that question, there's always the initial reaction of me feeling like a little bit annoyed, because learning more about Indonesia is the more like you learn about the importance of the relationship between Australia and Indonesia, the long history that's existed there, and kind of it's always difficult to answer on the spot, because it's like if someone had like a passion for like cooking or something, it's like, well, what got you into cooking? It's like, that's a whole story right there, and it's pretty much me telling you my life tale in a single sitting. But the main reason that really, to kind of like summarize my history with like studying Indonesian. So I started off in high school, started to learn it as a language because I wanted to learn a second language. I initially started learning both Latin and Indonesian. I cut off Latin after a couple of years because I realized, number one, it was a useless language, but also because it just started getting like, it started mentioning like, you got infinitives here, then you got diditums here, and I don't care anymore. And then, but with Indonesian, it was very accessible to a lot of English speakers, because number one, the alphabet's the same, which is a big plus, but also it was very, the translations I found from certain words to English to Indonesian, Indonesian to English, I found to be very, very unique and quite special. I always say that my favorite Indonesian word is politicos, just because the moment I learned the meaning of tikos by itself, meaning rat, I thought that was incredibly funny. Politicos, of course, mean politician. But in addition to that, after I kind of got over the high school hurdle, which was mainly focusing on learning the language, a little bit about the culture and a lot of grammar, university is where I really began to kind of get my teeth stuck into like the meat, if you will. That is learning about the history, the politics, the culture. And it's kind of something, I've always been like a massive fan of history. Like I studied the revolutions, the Chinese Revolution, Russian Revolution when I was in high school. And Indonesian history is so fascinating because you have so many different periods to potentially study. Like you've got the Majapahit Empire way back when, then of course you've got the colonial era, then you have the independence era, then the Orde Baru, then the Reformasi era. There's all these different areas of history to kind of discover and to learn about. It makes it so like fascinating, and it's interesting to see Indonesia's journey as not only a people but as a country as well to get where it is. That's something that, you know, I found fascinating, and something from what I've read is that a lot of academics find quite miraculous how Indonesia went from like an authoritarian dui fungsi military regime to, you know, one of the largest Muslim democracy in the world. So kind of learning about that and kind of my interest in like politics and international relations, it was kind of a perfect way for me to learn about Indonesia as a whole from all these different angles. And, you know, the more I kept learning about Indonesia, the more I became engrossed in it. And it kind of hit its peak in 2020 of all years when I actually studied the Universitas Udayana in Bali, where we did like a semester intensive, a month intensive in Bali. And, you know, during that we had opportunities to go on field trips. We visited the Taman Mini in Bali. We visited Desa Bengkala, which is a village in North Bali where about 90% of the population is actually deaf, and they have their own sign language. And even taking kind of field trips outside of our studies, where we went on a hike to Mount Batur, and we hiked that. And, you know, all those experiences, particularly like the hike that a few of us took up that mountain, like that, there was a moment when we kind of hit the peak of the mountain where I kind of had like an epiphany where I was like, this is it. Like, this is why Indonesia to me is so special, and it's why like I'm willing to dedicate myself so much to it, because I find it so not only like fascinating but just special. And it's something that, you know, at any opportunity I get, I try to get more people involved in it. And, you know, having like a lot of conversations recently with, particularly after the Indonesian election event, I've spoken a lot with people from the Young Diplomat Society, and a lot of them have been like amazed to learn so much about Indonesian politics. And it just kind of goes to show that Indonesia, and even like other countries within the region itself, there's such a long history that's so fascinating to understand. And kind of from our perspective as like one of the, as kind of like the, I guess you could say like one of the only like Western countries within Asia, like it's very important for us to kind of gain that that Asia literacy, not only if we want to become like a middle power within the region, but also if we want to kind of show like the respect that a lot of Asian countries deserve, and the struggle that they've fought to kind of reach these outcomes that they have today.
Now, speaking of dedication, do you want to try dedicating the next few minutes just to talk in Indonesian? Let's get comfortable here.
Saya bisa berupaya.
Right? Let's give it a shot. Jadi, nah, iya kan, jadi udah 3 tahun terakhir kamu tuh di AIYA gitu ya. Sekarang kan kita sekarang udah tahu kenapa kamu cinta banget gitu sama Indonesia gitu. Kenapa sayang banget, kenapa perhatian banget gitu sama budaya, sama bahasa Indonesia. Sekarang pertanyaannya, kenapa betah banget dia ya? Kenapa udah di AIYA 3 tahun? Kenapa nggak ke tempat lain gitu? Kenapa mendedikasikan banyak sekali waktumu hanya untuk AIYA?
Okay. Could you maybe repeat some of that a little bit slower for me, please?
Oh yeah. No, all good.
Ya, keterampilan bahasa saya cukup terbatas dan sejak saya sudah menyelesaikan studi saya di Indonesia di Universitas Melbourne, ya keterampilan bahasa saya cukup mengurangi over time. Tapi ya saya berupaya untuk menghidupi bahasa Indonesia saya. Tapi ya dengan bahasa Indonesia, like saya sangat kompeten untuk berbicara dan bahasa Indonesia. Tapi bidang yang saya selalu struggled with adalah mendengarkan. Like I've always, like, in general, like I've always, like, with some like listening things, I've always had like a little bit of difficulty, and it's always like bidang yang cukup sulit. So sorry if this.
No, all good. But I think that's the thing with like language learning as well. I think it's always the hearing comprehension that's always the hardest.
Yeah.
Right? But yeah, I'll just rephrase it to make it a bit punchy and short.
No worries, thank you. Makasih.
Like the summary is, kenapa di AIYA sudah sekian lamanya 3 tahun? Kenapa kamu di AIYA udah 3 tahun betah gitu? Kenapa mendedikasikan segitu banyak waktumu hanya untuk AIYA selama 3 tahun terakhir daripada mencari kesempatan-kesempatan yang lain di luar AIYA?
Baiklah, so untuk penjelasan itu like, mengapa saya memilih AIYA seperti like metode untuk like melakukan like
that, yeah, well, I mean that and why for so long.
Oh ya, baiklah, ya, bisa. Okay. So dengan AIYA, AIYA adalah, bagi saya AIYA adalah organisasi yang menyediakan kesempatan untuk belajar lebih lanjut tentang Indonesia dan budaya, dan khususnya untuk bertemu dengan lebih banyak orang Indonesia, yang sangat penting untuk mengembangkan pengertianku tentang Indonesia dan memperluas pengetahuan dengan antara Australia dan Indonesia. Dengan AIYA, saya sudah berpartisipasi dengan AIYA selama 3 tahun karena pada waktu ini saya berupaya untuk menemukan kesempatan pekerjaan dalam bidang Australia-Indonesia, tapi itu bidang pekerjaan yang cukup sulit untuk menemukan kesempatan, dan bagi saya AIYA selalu menyediakan kesempatan, dan itu menyediakan kesempatan untuk mungkin menemukan kesempatan baru dalam bidang ini, dan ya itu bagi saya itu organisasi yang sangat baik untuk ambisiku, karena itu berfokus dengan hubungan Australia-Indonesia dan memperkenalkan orang Australia dan orang Indonesia bersama. Jadi ya, it's something that I haven't really thought about that too much. Why I've dedicated a lot of it to AIYA, but yeah, it's hal yang ya cukup istimewa dan cukup unik. And I found that it's probably been the like organisasi terbaik untuk menawarkan waktuku. And yeah, to kind of use the contacts that I have developed over the years, and as in my role now to kind of help extend those relations. But yeah, it's something where there have been times where I've considered like volunteering for other organizations, but I've kind of I do feel I'm at the point now where I've kind of invested a lot into AIYA itself, so I might as well keep that going, and in kind of my other spare time, like trying to continue to find like kesempatan lain dan tentu saja bekerja.
Yeah, awesome. Now let's give your brain a break. I can see I can see it overheating just a bit. So let's shift again, and I'll probably just wrap this up by asking. By the end of the year, you won't be at AIYA forever, right? So by the end of the year, when you eventually leave your post as AIYA president, AIYA Victoria president, what would be your key markers for success? What do you, well, you sort of alluded to what you would like to achieve, right? But what are the things that you would like to do when, looking back in a few years' time, you would say to yourself, hey, look, I did good here, I made it. What would be those things?
I think the key things would to be create long-lasting connections between different youth organisations, not only just here in Melbourne, but kind of abroad as well, and to pretty much kind of create like a committee culture that's very flexible as well. Previous years, there has been a tendency for people to kind of stay within their own teams, to focus on like the education portfolio or the social cultural. But this year, one thing that me and my Vice President Argi have really wanted to do is to provide flexibility for a lot of people and to, again, kind of dip their toes into areas that they wouldn't necessarily have thought they'd be interested in, if it's something that they want to do, of course. But yeah, to kind of create a culture that feels flexible and accessible to anyone who would be interested in learning more about this space. But yeah, also creating new relations with different organizations and kind of expanding upon the relationships that we've already had. I know, as I said earlier, like it's very important that youth organizations work together to achieve mutually beneficial outcomes, but also it's very important that that new relationships are started with like organizations that are perhaps emerging, like with this podcast and blog, for example, Perantau, yang terhormat. But yeah, kind of my markers of success are creating a steady flow of relationships that we can call upon in the future, either for collaboration or mutual support, creating a committee culture that is flexible and accessible, and also creating like an organization that offers like a diverse array of events, not just for our members, but also for other people who are looking to get involved in this space, so they feel like more confident and more comfortable in attending these events and pretty much learning more about, the fantastic thing that is Australia-Indonesia, learning more about each other's culture, and yeah, just kind of learning more about something that, it needs more attention, quite frankly.
Yeah, and definitely talking about, it's like the definition of diaspora, especially Indonesian diaspora, has changed quite a bit over the last few years, right? Diaspora in the traditional sense, in the strictest sense, usually just talks about, first generation migrants usually, or just like temporary migrants that, go abroad just for a bit and then return back or don't return at all, right? Yeah. But then it really doesn't encompass a larger group of people, right? And one of the definitions that someone said a few years back was that, the Indonesian diaspora not only includes, people like me, just temporary migrants outside, or even, first, second generation migrants that have lived abroad, but it can also include people who just has a very deep love for Indonesia. And I think you definitely fit the bill for that sort of definition. So I really appreciate and thank you for your time in terms of talking about these kind of things and why Indonesia means so much to you without even the slightest background in Indonesian. And yet you've dedicated quite a lot of time to learning more about Indonesia, more than some Indonesians have ever done in their whole lives. So I appreciate you for that.
No, well, thank you, Billy. Like, it is really touching to hear that, and you know, I'll say this as well. Like, anytime I've kind of talked about this with Indonesians, like kind of my background and stuff like that, like a lot of Indonesians offer that sentiment as well, where they feel like they feel very respected and like very like appreciative that like they would take an interest in this field, and I think one thing as well that I would like to achieve, like on a personal level, is to kind of make that like more reciprocal as well. I feel like Indonesians are very, very appreciative of people who learn about their culture, but particularly when it comes to language as well, like being in Australia specifically, there's almost an expectation that you would speak like fluent English, for example, and instead of there being like a way through which you can try and like communicate through like loose English or something like that, it's kind of, instead of that, there's more like annoyance when it's not really fluent. Whereas if an Australian goes to Indonesia, like they're very lucky to find someone who can speak English, and there's still that kind of that respect, I feel. So kind of definitely this is something that I think will take time to kind of change, this kind of this willingness to kind of like learn more about each other's culture and to understand that, you know, a lot of people have to work very hard to kind of come to not only to get like certain like language skills up to par, but also it's a big culture shock as well. I know that when I went to Indonesia, like it was a culture shock at times. Even getting Bali belly within 3 days, that was a big experience. But yeah, it's definitely like it's so nice to have these conversations with you and other Indonesians, and you know it's something that always keeps me going. You know, meeting new Indonesians, learning about their story, learning about how they kind of got into the areas they got into, and kind of their like long history of, you know, their own personal journeys of getting to where they are. So yeah, I thank you so much for this opportunity, Billy.
The Perantau podcast is always looking for new stories to tell and people to meet. So, if you have a story worth telling, don't be shy. Reach out on Instagram, LinkedIn, email, or wherever else you may find the Perantau podcast. Until then, thank you, and see you soon.